Hello and welcome to the Homeless Consultants channel. My name is Paul B. I am the Homeless Consultant. Today I want to, as briefly as possible, go over the fundamental flaw with hierarchies, such as corporations and government. Helps to explain a lot of what I talk about on this channel. It is minus 13 degrees outside, with warnings of wind chills down to minus 40 here on New Year's Day. Happy New Year. My toes are absolutely frozen, and my mouse keeps sliding away under the blankets, and my glasses lost one of their lenses. I have a chart I came up with to show you what I'm going to talk about. I don't have a way to get you that chart, so I will display it slowly on the screen here and leave it to you to find a way to open up a second window or whatever you have to do to follow along. But this originates from something that happened last night. My employer, just like on Thanksgiving, just like on Christmas, they closed early the day before the holiday, which meant that the night before I basically left work and then almost immediately came back to work. And then after that I have basically almost 2 days to just sit in this car and freeze in this manner, instead of having the day broken up where I can warm up inside at work. They closed on New Year's Day, which they've never done before. I'm sure for every other employee who has a home, that's a wonderful thing. They get paid for it, all's good. But for me, it's a recipe for misery and suffering. As we end up the month, I had perfect attendance again, so I got yet another free day off, which cost me $100 if I do anything with it. If I go into the hotel, I have to pay $100 from the money I have to have somewhere to stay for that day. Otherwise, I spend that day off sitting in here in temperatures like minus 13 degrees. So after working all day, at the very end of the day, right at the end, right before I'm supposed to be done and leave, an issue comes up at work. An issue comes up. Now, with what I do in my job, I'm supporting other people. I'm helping other people so that they resolve problems, so they don't have problems, things like that, right? But I've told you before, our company isn't exactly the most ethical on the planet. So the company had done something pretty horrific, and they didn't bother to tell the people I need to assist. They didn't bother to tell me. In fact, there was no way for me to even determine what I needed to know in order to help them. The information just wasn't even there. It doesn't even exist. That's how little this company cares about anything. So I end up looking like a completely incompetent idiot because I'm spending all my time just trying to even figure out what is the problem. I can't even determine what happened here. All I know is we got a disaster. I'm supposed to be the one helping them. But it's not because I'm stupid, it's because we weren't given any information to work with. So my supervisor, who just gets to sit off in the distance and watch this from above and not really have to get involved, can you guess who they singled out of corporate executive management, out of all the managers down to the bottom, out of the people who are affected here, out of everyone involved in this thing? Can you imagine who they singled out as being the problem here? Me. Because I was stumbling and fumbling trying to fix a problem when I didn't even know what the problem was, because no information was provided to me. And I'm going to give you an analogy here to show you, because I'm not going to give you the specifics of my job, but this is a good analogy. But the supervisor looks at me and more or less blames me because I'm sitting there fumbling and I don't know what to do. You know what? You don't know what to do if you don't know what to do. That's what training is for. That's what information is for. But if I don't have information and I don't have training, I can't do anything. So I ended up staying late. Just even though I was going to get paid, we were supposed to leave an hour early but get paid for the whole day, but I ended up staying late, so I didn't get that free time. I had to stay there instead and try to resolve this. Look at the chart, folks. Oh, I wish the other eye was the one that was in there. On the left-hand side, it talks about the people we're looking at here. First one is the affected party. Who is the affected party? Who is in a business or in a hierarchy, in a government? Who are the affected people? Well, in my company, it would be the product end users. You know, internal, external customers, whatever you want to call them. Who's the responsible party? The buck stops with executive management, specifically the president, the CEO, executive management. Below them is another tier divided into two, and this is true for most companies. The medical company I worked for was basically the same thing. Long term, I can't even read without glasses. I have another broken pair of glasses here. At least they have two lenses, they just don't have two of these. Yeah, long-term permanent solutions providers. When it comes to management, that would be what you call upper management. Vice presidents. You know, vice presidents are a dime a dozen in these big corporations. Big sounding title, but perfectly disposable. Perfect executive scapegoats. Below them are middle managers. Middle managers, the people who are actually on the day-to-day basis managing things, and design engineers, for example. You know, with the medical company where I'm at, things like that. Now, at that point, there's a break, and there's something I can only call communications flow management. I'll call it something else in a moment, but communications flow management is what I'll call it here, because it's essentially what it is. In almost every company today, that is human resources. Not personnel, not those who support persons, but the people who manage resources that are human. You know, like you would manage toilet paper or a mop or something like that, or printer paper, printer toner. Okay, when those resources are human beings, human resources manages that. They consume them, they dispose of them when necessary. Now, when you get below that, when you get past this gap, there's the rest of management, what you would call lower management, which are usually called supervisors. And they are directly overseeing people who are actually doing the work, which in this case is me. Now, below that, there's even lower class that you would call labor. These are people who are pushing the mops, cleaning up, the janitors. In a factory, these are the people on the assembly line. All right? They do the actual work. Now, my analogy, I'm going to use one of the most poorly managed companies that has ever existed. NASA. Yeah, see? NASA. National Aeronautics and Space Administration, or never a straight answer. The management who managed to somehow in 20 years kill 14 astronauts and destroy 2/5 of their shuttle fleet through complete, utter management incompetence, despite having some of the best engineers in the world. At NASA, the affected party would be the astronauts. Their lives are on the line. The responsible party would be executive management at NASA, executive director, etc. The long-term permanent solution providers are, again, what you would call vice presidents, upper management. Below them are the middle managers who are on a day-to-day basis overseeing the design engineers. Then you have that firewall, human resources. Then you have the people who are actually doing the work in a couple of tiers. You have lower management supervisors who are overseeing the people who are gluing those tiles, those heat shield tiles on the space shuttle and things like that. You know, plugging in wires and making sure food is cooked for the astronauts before they go into space, things like that. All right? All the grunt workers, that's what they're doing. So essentially the same hierarchy. Now, what is the essential function of each of these groups? Well, the affected party, they are the end users. If you're making a product, they're the ones using the product. If you're providing a service, they're the ones consuming the service, supposedly benefiting from it. They could be called internal or external customers. They might be out, if you're running a retail store, they're going to be outside your business. If there are other people in your business who you're supporting, then those are internal customers. This bar on my side is killing me. Who's the responsible party? Well, just like any hierarchy, the person at the top, where the buck should stop. What's their responsibility? Executive management. It is to run the company. To run the company. Specifically, they do so by making strategic, long-term decisions. You can make analogies to the military here very easily. Strategy and tactics. What about the long-term permanent solutions providers, the upper management, the vice presidents, and the middle managers and design engineers? What about them? Well, the upper management, the vice presidents, their job is to implement the strategic decisions that the president or CEO makes. But it's also to make tactical decisions in order to make the strategic outcome happen. They pass that down to the middle managers. The middle managers and design engineers, their job is to implement the tactical decisions. Then you got the firewall again. Communications flow management. Well, what is the purpose of human resources? Not personnel, human resources. You know, like where Angie Craig, this ridiculously useless state representative or U.S. representative from Minnesota, she was human resources. Their purpose is to build and maintain a wall or a buffer between management and labor. In other words, a wall, they're there to build a moat between decision makers and workers. Because you can't have the president of the company actually talking to somebody on the assembly line. They might learn something that helps them run the company and do their job, and you can't have that. This is the problem with hierarchies, folks. For that reason, human resources could easily be called the enforcer of any company. They're the ones who call you in. If you've got a complaint, oh, the product I'm building could explode and kill a customer. You know, I'm going to try to run this up the flagpole to get management to hear it, but nobody will listen. So one day I walk into a vice president's office and I try to tell him about it. And the next thing I know, human resources is calling me into their office and saying, you know, if you're not happy here, you're perfectly welcome. It's an employment at will state. You're perfectly welcome to leave and look for a job somewhere else if you're not happy here. And thus, the problem that the person's raising that could kill somebody never gets addressed. Who's to blame? Is it human resources? Yeah. Is it the vice president who called human resources? Yeah. Is it the CEO who's supposedly overseeing these vice presidents who are doing something that could cause someone to die? Yeah. The buck stops with them. Way back when, I put a couple videos up about Wells Fargo and what they did to me. And one of those was addressed to their CEO. Because the buck stops with him. And if it doesn't stop with him, then that responsible party is irresponsible. That's why they're paid the big bucks. The function of someone lower at NASA, at my level, the supervisors, someone like my supervisor would be the equivalent at NASA of a flight director. Flight director. That's the person who's standing there with all those people with those consoles when the shuttle's up flying or when it's landing. They're overseeing all of that. The people at the consoles, that's someone like me. And then you have a group below, which is labor. Those are the people who are plugging in things, moving food, cooking, sweeping floors, doing all the busy work. That's the way it is at NASA. So I would be the equivalent of mission control, you might say, at NASA, what I do. In other words, I do the actual work. I'm the one who does the work, and the grunts below me. We are the ones who do the work. If we didn't do anything, all these other high-paid people would have nothing to show for whatever it is they do all day. Nothing would happen. Absolutely zilch, zero, nothing. Because they don't do anything, you see. The design engineers, I guess technically they design things, but that doesn't produce a finished good, does it? That doesn't produce a service. So that's the actual functions in a hierarchy. I'm generalizing, of course I have to. There are differences between government and corporations, between this corporation and that corporation. But next, just for the sake of argument, I threw in here organized crime. I'm not an expert on organized crime. I haven't been a member of official organized crime before, although with this current employer, I'm starting to wonder. But at the top, at the responsible party would be the Don Corleone or whoever. The long-term permanent solutions providers, which would be upper management or vice presidents at companies, they would be the regional crime bosses. The middle management below them are the local crime bosses. That firewall in between, the enforcer, the one who looks for anyone who might be trouble and gets rid of them, obviously, that's the hitmen. That's human resources in a company. The short-term solutions providers, in other words, the people who are really just kind of actually doing something. You have people supervising them, those would be the gang leaders, and then you have the people who are doing it. Those would be the gang members. That's where I fall. I would be a gang member at my level in this company if I were in organized crime. Then below that, you have all these expendable henchmen. You know, the red shirts from Star Trek. Oh, this thing's just jamming into my side. It is so cold. All right, that's organized crime. Next, let's look at government. Government is different for a couple of reasons, but the hierarchy is relevant. You have the same problems with hierarchies. Who are the affected parties with government? Well, citizens. Duh. That's the whole point. Government is supposed to be there to serve the citizens. Doesn't happen that way, but it's supposed to be. Who are the responsible parties? Well, and I'm going at the state level because that's what our Constitution says. The federal government is supposed to be this itty-bitty, teeny-weeny, tiny, little itty-bitty organization that does nothing but help coordinate what's going on with free and independent 50 states. It's not supposed to be some ridiculous powerhouse tyrannical juggernaut that tells all the states what to do. If you don't believe me, the Constitution is 4 pages long. I advise you to read it. The federal government is supposed to be this itty-bitty little thing that just handles the coordination of the states, and which represents the collective states to the world through diplomacy or in war. For that reason, I'm talking about the states, because that's the legitimate government in the United States of America. Well, who's the responsible party? It is more than one person. It is the governor, it is the legislature, and it is the Supreme Court. 3 of them. See, there's this thing called checks and balances. The reason you can't get a tyrant if people do their jobs, the reason you cannot get tyranny in our country is because there's checks and balances. For example, let's say a governor decides to put up a completely unconscionable and unconstitutional stay-at-home order, or a vaccine mandate or something like that. Well, what's going to happen is the legislature is going to stop it. They're either going to impeach that person and throw them in prison because of what they've done to people, or they're going to do something else to stop it. It's a check and a balance against a tyrant being a governor. The Supreme Court also can make a ruling that will put a stop to it if people obey the Supreme Court, which in our federal government right now, they just ignore the Supreme Court. That's a form of tyranny we haven't really seen since the British Empire, since before the United States of America ever existed. But most Americans aren't even aware of it. Checks and balances defined by constitutions of states and our U.S. Constitution. That's why you can have 3 leaders independently who are responsible parties. But the thing is, they've invented another one over the centuries. In the 230 years or so of American history, they've created another one called regulatory agencies, like OSHA, for example. What is that? Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Departments of Health, the Department of Education. All these things where they have to keep adding cabinet members because they're just making these things up out of the clear blue sky. They're not constitutional. They were never meant to be there. A regulatory agency has the power of legislation. They create a regulation. It has the power of law. It can be enforced. They can steal your money if you don't obey. Like OSHA is chomping at the bit and salivating at the idea of stealing tons of money from every company in America who doesn't comply with this vaccine mandate. Regulatory agencies are not supposed to exist. That's why one of the biggest complaints about government is over-regulation. But there shouldn't be any regulation. It's not their job. It's not constitutional. So I put an asterisk on that. Regulatory agencies are not authorized to have this kind of power, and they have no accountability. They're not elected to office. They're appointed. Below that, what would be upper management, or vice presidents, you might say. Not really vice presidents, but upper management in a company are regional crime bosses and organized crime are county officials. See, it just keeps getting closer and closer to your home. The next level down is middle managers. Middle managers are mayors, city councils, sheriffs. Now notice that so far through all this, all these leaders, everybody is elected except the regulatory agencies. Then you have that firewall, the enforcer, the hitmen. Who are they? Well, the IRS for the federal, but in Minnesota, the Minnesota Department of Revenue. If they need to take somebody out, let's say because a governor doesn't like a citizen's politics, the Department of Revenue can take them out of existence just like that. The court system. The court system, likewise, can take someone out of commission completely. The courts in Minnesota have recently taken a couple of police officers out of commission. So instead of protecting and serving me and everyone else in Minnesota, they're sitting in a prison right now. Attorney General's office, I talked about them in the last video. Not very competent. Prosecutors, these are the hitmen. Now, if they're responsible, if these people have morals and ethics, if they do their job and they love their country and they love other people, instead of salivating at the idea of having power over other people, they can fulfill those duties responsibly and not hurt anybody. But they don't. That's the problem, you see. And there's nothing to stop them because nobody's stopping all the others. They keep re-electing these corrupt, incompetent governors, legislators over and over and over. Legislators who are in office for 30 years like Biden, who are complete, utter failures as legislators, and then they get elected president. Checks and balances means that voters get rid of those people after their first failed term in office. They should have got rid of Angie Craig after her first failed term in office, but they didn't. So now she's going to start building her 30-year career where she becomes a multimillionaire on a public servant salary, like all the others. I'll let you figure out how that's possible. Below that would be, short-term solutions providers, lower management. At NASA, that would be the flight director. In government, or in organized crime, that would be the gang leaders. In government, that would be things like, I'm specifically zeroing in on police here because of what's happened to the police lately. Police chiefs and sergeants, the people who are running the police department. The next level down, again, my level, which would be like mission control at NASA or gang members at organized crime, would be the police officers who are out there driving around, putting their neck on the line, having a bullseye on their head all the time from all these gangbangers and creeps out there who want to hurt them, while they're protecting you and me. And they have to try to figure out how to survive in that without making mistakes. And 911 operators. At the very low level are all the support staff, all those people sitting at desks at all these offices, the janitors, the people filing papers. See, all these hierarchies are essentially the same. Now let's look at the compensation, and we'll kind of skip the organized crime and government from now on. I just wanted to point out that the hierarchies are there. But notice that the responsible party at the top, because the buck stops with them, they have extraordinarily high pay. Upper management, the vice presidents, have very high pay. Middle managers, design engineers and such, they have high salaries. Human resources, the hitmen, the enforcers, they have high to very high. Some companies might be more intermediate for the low-level people, but certainly for the director of human resources, their job is, few people are paid as well on a task-to-task basis in organized crime than a hitman. Hitman can be paid $50,000, $100,000 to kill someone. Human resource directors are paid very, very well in most cases. Then you go down to the lower management, which would be like my supervisor and me, flight directors and mission control at NASA, gang leaders and gang members. Their pay is the supervisors are paid intermediate, police chief, sergeants. The police officers would have relatively low pay, which shouldn't be. They're the ones putting their neck on the line. And then the support staff, very low pay. Okay? Now again, I'm going to leave out organized crime and government going forward because it isn't about this, but, well, I will bring up government at one point. Alright, got 2 more columns here. The next one is, notice one thing though, those who have the most responsibility, supposedly, the leaders, the CEOs, the executive management, the governors, legislators, they have the highest pay. But the people who are actually doing the work, who are way down here, they have the lowest pay. Did you notice that? You can take a company that's run well. Let's say a CEO did do, in fact, a good job. You should be able to remove that CEO, and the company should keep running smooth as a Swiss watch. Because the CEO created a smooth running machine. It's the people at the bottom who do the work, folks. But if you remove the people at the bottom, if they go on strike or something, the whole company comes to a halt. And yet, it's the person at the top who's paid the most, you see, not the people who actually do the work. You see the problem already. There's a big problem there. Next column is, what is their direct interaction with affected parties? Remember, each one of these has affected parties. So it'd be like end users, internal, external customers in my case. At NASA, it'd be the astronauts, and with government, it is the citizens, we the people. Those are the affected parties. Well, what's the direct interaction with those people in each of these hierarchies? Well, when it comes to the responsible party, the CEO, the president, the governor, the Don of organized crime, none. They have no direct interaction with the affected parties at all. They're so distant from it. The only time they have any interaction is when someone stages a publicity stunt. I run a company that makes lumber. I never interact with the people who actually use our lumber, but every once in a while our public relations department will haul me out for a couple hours, and I'll go out to Habitat Humanity and I'll stand around with the people who are using our lumber, and I'll shake their hand and smile, and I'll swing a hammer a couple times while the camera's filming, and then I go back to my office before I go back to my mansion. But otherwise, I have no interaction with the people who use our products. What about the long-term permanent solution providers, the upper management, vice presidents, middle managers, design engineers? Well, the upper management, vice presidents, they have no interaction whatsoever with affected parties. They're completely isolated. Middle management and design engineers, here's the problem, folks. This is the key right here, more than anything else. Well, other than the fact that there's no one's keeping, the checks and balances aren't working in government. But design engineers, when I studied software engineering, rule number 1 was you do not design software unless you're in constant consultation with the people who will be using your software. Because otherwise you're just making some random product that may or may not do what those people actually need it to do. You're supposed to constantly be in touch with those people. But in practice, in the real world, they rarely ever are. Often they're not at all in touch with the people who actually use the software. At NASA, that would be equivalent to the design engineers, the people who build all those switches on the control panel, who build the rocket engine, or who design the rocket engines. They design how these systems will work. You have to flip this switch and pull this lever and turn this dial to make such and such happen. The design engineers do that. Can you imagine if they're not ever in touch with the astronauts? The astronauts would say, well, you know what? The problem is, when you're doing that, when you're stuck in a seat in a space capsule, you can't reach this last knob that you tell us we need to do. That's what the design engineer needs to know so they can move this thing over to where it's convenient. And if you can't do that, then now you've got the pilot in a space shuttle who has to ask the co-pilot or order the co-pilot to flip that switch because they can't reach it. It could have been fixed if the design engineers had been in touch with the astronauts in the first place. Now at NASA, that probably happens a lot more often than in companies. But in companies, whoa, folks, no. And that's the big problem. When I was at that medical company, they're making medical devices that are supposed to be saving lives. I didn't see the design engineers having any contact whatsoever with the people who actually used our products. So how do they know if they work? Well, they know it because the marketing department went out and did surveys, focus groups, things like that. And then they communicate what they think they learned to the design engineers. It's a complete breakdown. And that's where a lot of these hierarchies fail. But what about in government? That would be like the mayors, city councils, and sheriffs, okay? That's the level we're talking about. They do have public comment. You can go to your city council meeting and talk to the mayor and the city council. That's why they do it. That's supposed to be there. That's a good thing, and that should never be stopped. And when you see these people today who, when they go up and they say something that people just don't like when they're at a city council meeting and they get arrested because they're talking about critical race theory or something, that is an abomination, folks. That's the equivalent of telling NASA engineers, do not talk to the astronauts. How are you going to get anything done? How can you run a competent hierarchy that way? Well, those people who are having those people arrested there, they should be the ones thrown in prison for basically trying to overthrow our system of government. But in a company like mine, that would be the equivalent of people who are a couple tiers above me, making decisions where they tell my supervisor what to do. Those people never having any interaction with the end user. So they don't have the foggiest idea what needs a fixing. And they don't seem to care either. Because they have no interaction whatsoever. They let people like me be the point. I'm the point person who has direct interaction, which is the next level down here. Alright? Now, okay, human resources, or the hitmen. Okay, well, hitmen, again, that's why I didn't put organized crime and government in here officially, because there's some variances. The hitmen obviously have some interaction with the affected party when they shoot them, for example. Oh, great. I just lost my whole screen. I told you, this mouse just falls off all the time. Alright, so the next level down will be human resources. Do they ever have interaction with customers or product end users? Only if it's internal customers, and that's in the capacity as personnel, doing personnel things, health insurance, all that stuff. No, they don't have any interaction whatsoever with, if you build widgets and you sell widgets at Best Buy, human resource department at Best Buy doesn't have any interaction with the customer who walks into the store and buys a widget. None whatsoever, and they never will. They're completely isolated from reality. Then below that, you got the short-term people, my supervisor and me, the flight director and mission control, the gang leaders and gang members, the police chiefs and sergeants, and the police officers and 911 operators, 911 operators. Well, the supervisors have very minimal interaction with affected parties, if any. Very minimal. Very minimal. Only if it's escalated, you might say, up to them. But people in my position, constant interaction. It's the whole thing. That's what we do. We are the ones out of the entire company, including the millionaire CEO, who has constant, endless interaction with the affected parties. Well, what if the company is doing something that affects that party in a very, very bad way? For example, it might cause them to die, or something worse. Who do they have interaction with in the company? Me, in my case. If the shuttle has an issue, they call up mission control. They don't call the flight director. They call mission control. Mission control, their supervisor, the flight director, overhears that and interjects if need be. Remember, minimal interaction. Human resources at NASA, they're not helping the shuttle land safely. Middle management, design engineers, they were done before the shuttle launched, all the way up to the top of NASA. Again, unless there's a publicity stunt, they have no interaction with the astronauts. And then the people at the very bottom, sweeping floors, filing papers, all that stuff, they have no interaction with the affected parties. So it's the people who are doing the actual work at my level who have the most and almost constant interaction with the affected parties, whoever they are. Whoever they are. I have one more column here. And this column reads, consequences of company's failure. So let's say the company fails miserably at its task. In other words, what is the damage to the affected party? Sorry, I had to push my intestines back into my abdomen. Well, the consequences of the company or hierarchy failing for affected parties, the consequences for them is anything ranging from inconvenience to death or worse. It just depends on what you're dealing with. What about executive management, the CEO, the president? What's the consequences if the hierarchy fails? Nothing. Or voluntary resignation / golden parachute. Golden parachute means they get to leave the company with a nice severance package that will take care of them and about 20 generations of their descendants living lives of luxury going forward. Notice the word or. It's not a range of nothing to voluntary. It's either nothing happens to them or they are let go, but they're let go in a way that looks voluntary to the public, to the shareholders. I voluntarily resigned. You ever see that in the news? The president says, I accepted, General so-and-so's resignation today. It's like, do you think the general just decided to resign, or was he told you will resign? If you do so, you get a nice severance package. If you don't, you'll lose everything. What about middle management, design engineers? What's the consequences to them? They're the design engineers and the managers who oversaw them. They're the ones who were supposed to be talking to the astronauts to find out where that switch should be so that it can actually be flipped by the person who's supposed to flip it. Well, what happens to them if something tragic happens? Anything, a range, again, from nothing to demotion or some kind of lateral transfer. Remember when Waco happened, the Waco massacre, when the government, the ATF and all that slaughtered all those people inside their home / church? There was no punishment for those people. Those middle managers who were responsible for that, they got transferred. They got transferred over to the Murrah building in Oklahoma City, by the way. But that's a whole other story that I've talked about before. Below that firewall, the hitmen, human resources. What are the consequences of a company's failure to human resources? Nothing whatsoever. Ever. Human resources is the closest to Teflon immunity you have in a company. They are the hitmen. What are you going to do, Don Corleone? Are you going to fire your hitman? Are you going to humiliate your hitman? His job is to kill people. Is that what you're going to do to him? Are you going to mess with human resources? Even if you're the CEO? No. Human resources, even if human resources contributed tremendously to the utter failure of this company by, getting rid of their very best employees, for example, in an incredibly ruthless and mean-spirited way, not one human resource person will ever be held accountable. There's no consequences to them. One of the problems with hierarchies. When we had personnel departments, it was a whole nother story. Because a personnel department was responsible for really, truly dealing with human beings, helping employees. They weren't a firewall. They weren't hitmen. Their job was to assist employees with employee needs. But that got replaced with human resources. And that's one of the things that sent our corporations down the toilet, was the emergence of human resources. At the next level down, the flight director at NASA. My supervisors at that level, gang leaders, police chiefs and sergeants, if the hierarchy fails miserably, what are the consequences to them? Generally, and I should leave out organized crime and government, generally in a company, nothing. It's not that they're immune like human resources, it's just that they're kind of caught in between. There isn't any particular benefit to scapegoating them or legitimately casting blame on them if they are to blame. There's nothing. They're at this one little area, this little Lagrange point, where they just get to float around. And it's not to say you can't have a flight director or a supervisor on a manufacturing floor, for example, be held accountable for something, but generally if the company fails, they are not going to be the ones held accountable. At the lower level are people like me who actually do the work. Police officers. Can you guess what their consequences are if the hierarchy fails? Well, in Minnesota, we just had 2 police officers sent to prison for doing their job, as they were trained to do. And doing so as a human being who makes mistakes. For example, pulling out the wrong weapon when they're in an intense situation, not understanding what the threat is to them. Or someone else who's doing what they were told to do, put your knee down so the person can't move their head up and down, and then they suddenly get blamed for choking the person. Even though the person was yelling out, "I can't breathe," the whole time, which you can't do if you're choking. If you can't breathe, you can't yell, "I can't breathe." I'm not going to go over that again. Minnesota, folks, Minnesota. This is the kind of juries you've got out there. Oh my gosh, listen to him yelling, "I can't breathe. He's being suffocated." Oh, good heavens. No, it would be people at my level who get the punishment. We're the ones who would get fired. So in a situation like this, for example, if I got so flustered that it just became this big cluster bomb where I'm trying to help this person who needs my assistance, I'm supposed to be supporting, but I can't help them because nobody at the hierarchy above did anything right. They caused the problem in the first place. They never informed the person. They never informed my level. They never gave us any training of how to deal with it. Just nothing, running completely blind, and I have to try to figure out what to do. It sounds a lot like a police officer who has to try to figure out, should I shoot or not, doesn't it? Those situations come up. They are the people who get annihilated. They're the ones who get the blame. They get fired, they get written up, they get scapegoat termination, they could even get criminal prosecution. The people below us, at my level, janitors, people filing papers, doing all this, just the grunt workers, the labor, are they going to get to blame? No. You could argue in a certain case, let's say a plane crashes and they trace it down to this one circuit board and they do all the research to go find the subcontractor who built that circuit board, and they go through their paperwork and they find out it's this person on the assembly floor who was responsible for soldering that board, and apparently they didn't do a good job soldering. But then again, they also had a QC inspector above that person who's doing the soldering. So are they to blame, or is the person who did the soldering to blame? Or is it the person who oversees the QC inspectors all the way up to the top of that company? Do you see what I'm talking about, folks? Do you see what I'm talking about? The problem with hierarchies. I just wanted to go over this chart with you. I don't even really need to comment on it too much, do I? Okay? The fact is, if the person at the top who's paid all that money, if they're competent, if they're truly good at what they're doing, again, they can be removed. And the company's going to go on at least for a pretty long time. You ever have a big ship in the ocean, how long it takes to get that thing to turn? Okay? The captain can die of a heart attack, and that ship's still going to continue doing what it was doing for quite a long time before someone else can influence it. And if he had it set on its right course, the ship is going to be safe. Why are they paid that much money? If something happens all the way down to where the janitor is creating slippery floors and not putting up signs or making sure people are protected, so people are slipping and falling and breaking their neck and ended up like Christopher Reeve, most people would say, well, that has nothing to do with the CEO. I say it has everything to do with the CEO. The buck stops with them. That's why they're paid millions of dollars. But what they do instead is they sit in their offices, they have no interaction with anybody, and all they do is try to placate shareholders, the people who make money, or sit there and make money, or go out with public relations in the news media. They're the face, but they're not paying attention. How many companies have you worked for, especially big companies, where the boss, the president, the CEO, not just once in a while, but frequently walks through every level of that company? Design engineers, middle management, they always meet with vice presidents, supervisors, grunt workers, people at my level. constantly coming up to us, taking us out to lunch and saying, I want you to be honest with me and tell me what are the issues, what is going really well with us, and what is going wrong. And I'm going to take that to the top, and I'm going to make sure that gets pushed down and the problems get fixed and that the good things remain. That's what a competent CEO would do. How often have you worked for a company where the CEO did that? All the time. As part of their job. Not sitting in an office all the time and once in a while taking a stroll through the factory. Where everyone is even terrified to even say a word to the CEO. Because if you say a word to the CEO, guess who comes in? The hitmen. The enforcers. Human resources. Well, Paul, I noticed you felt the need to step above the crowd and raise this problem you're having with the CEO when he came through for a visit. He's just coming through for a friendly visit. He's we have a chain of command. You should tell your supervisor these things, and then they tell their boss, 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 and then it gets to the CEO, and the CEO comprehends everything perfectly as if you had told them directly, right? Wrong. See, human resources steps in and stops you. And everybody knows it. That's why at that company, at that medical company, when Al Franken and who's that Minnesota Senator, Klobuchar, when they came in on their own occasions to speak to our people, that's why. They're coming in there to be lobbied by our company in the executive room, the one with all the oak wood and with all the really good food. Then they go into the junky little cafeteria where we're sitting, and Klobuchar gets up there and tries to act like a comedian. And at the end, you can ask a few questions. Are you supposed to raise an important question at that point in time? Or are you going to be intercepted by human resources on your way back to your desk? Which is that's why what Klobuchar and Franken were doing was a campaign stop. But they're pretending that what they're doing is going on a fact-finding mission to help local and regional state industry. But when in fact what they're actually doing is they're doing a campaign stop. Just by standing in front of those people, just the fact that you saw one of these people in real life, if you're not a thinker, makes you more likely to vote for them, even if they're utterly incompetent. That's why Klobuchar and Franken did that. That's why Angie Craig brags about how often she goes out and talks to people. Is she talking to people face to face, where she has to answer their hard questions with other people listening? Or is she just going out to these events and saying, how many people are here? 5,000 people? Write it down. I interacted with 5,000 constituents, and start adding those up so that at the end of the election cycle, she's sitting there saying, well, I had interaction with 692,000 constituents in the past 8 months. Which is impossible, by the way. God, I'm cold, and I had some... Oh, man, I got a lot of strange things going on here. Folks, there's no reason I should have had to go through what I went through at work. I'm going through all of that so that I can leave work early because they just mandated it. So that I can spend the next nearly 48 hours sitting in this car when it's 13 degrees outside and I am really freezing. I gotta end this. My intestines again. And the last thing, my last task of the day ends up becoming this cluster bomb because our company did something that is horribly unethical and immoral to the person who I'm supposed to support. And nobody told that person, nobody told me, nobody provided any information for me to even look up to figure out what's going on. So I'm spending my whole time just trying to even understand what the problem is. Meanwhile, I've got a supervisor up there. The only thing he can say is, what did he say? How did he phrase it? It was ridiculous. Find what we can do right now. I think it was something like that. Find what we can do right now. And it's in a kind of an accusatory tone. Don't sit there and try to figure out the problem. Don't try to explain the problem to this person, this affected party. I'm sure the last thing the Apollo 13 astronauts, when their ship was breaking down, and they're depending on mission control to save their lives, I'm sure the last thing they wanted to know was details of what might be wrong in there, so that maybe they themselves could figure out a solution that would save their lives, or at the very least, they will go to their graves knowing what happened, versus one of those situations where they say, the hardest thing about it is never knowing what really happened. My daughter disappeared 30 years ago. They just found her bones now. I can have closure. For 30 years, I didn't know what happened. So I'm there trying to explain. I'm trying to figure this out and work it out with this person I'm supporting. Trying to explain to them what happened as I'm trying to figure out what's happening. And I get blasted for doing that, which is I'm doing for them exactly what an affected party would want you to do. What they should want you to do. They want to know why they had basically, the impact in this case is to completely upset somebody's professional life. That's the consequence of this miserable failure here. The person I'm supporting potentially could have had their professional life decimated by this problem. Do you think they don't want to understand what in the world happened? But when I start trying to tell them what happened, my supervisor doesn't point a finger at anyone else in the company all the way to where the buck stops at the top. He points it at me instead. You don't have to explain what's going on here. Just find what you can do now. To which I responded, how do I know what I can do if I don't even know what the problem is? How do you find a solution if you don't know what the problem is? For example, let's say legislators don't understand anything about homelessness. They don't have the foggiest idea what homelessness means, or the Supreme Court is oblivious to what homelessness is, or what the life of a homeless person is like. If they don't understand homelessness, how are they going to pass laws and create agencies and create social services that effectively serve homeless people? They can't. It's impossible because they're dumb. They don't know what they're talking about. They're ignorant. They're oblivious. They don't have to be evil. They don't have to be hateful toward homeless people. If you don't have the information to work with, you can't make good decisions. Duh! And yet that's exactly what my supervisor told me to do, was to make decisions and stop looking for the information I need to make wise decisions. I'm sorry, folks, but if I ran the company, if I was the CEO, and I observed that happening, that supervisor would be on the unemployment line today. And that's why, at the very top where I'm making all the money, my company would be running smoothly from top to bottom. That's why. But instead, we've got a CEO over there somewhere who's out partying, living in mansions, doing whatever. They'll never even know that this happened. They'll never know. What am I going to do? Because this thing happens all the time in my workplace. The same thing. A disaster happens caused by utter incompetence at the middle levels of our company, at the high levels. Utter incompetence. It filters down to where I, as the person supporting the affected party is put in a position where they can suffer extreme distress, having their professional lives decimated, for example. And the people at the top never even hear about it. Because if I talk to my supervisor, it ends there. They're not going to take it up the flagpole. Those are the equivalents of gang leaders. Is the gang leader going to go to the local crime boss and say, Rocco here, I went out on a extortion racket run with Rocco, and Rocco went into the laundromat and he came back and he complained that his gun jammed. So is the gang leader who's driving the car, is he going to go to the local crime boss and say, we got a problem here. We got some guns that aren't quite working right. Is he going to do that? Or is he going to say, Rocco, shut up, or I'm sending the hitman over to get rid of you? That's what the supervisor essentially did. That's how I ended my year. The very last moments of my very last shift on New Year's Eve. And this is par for the course with this company ever since I started working there. If it didn't get past the supervisor, how is it going to get to his boss, The middle managers who were overseeing design engineers who could fix this problem if they knew about it, if they cared about it. How is that going to get up to the vice presidents? And then from the vice presidents to the president? Because whenever the president, the CEO, the extraordinarily rare times that he's visited, which is probably, 2, 3, 4 times in the time I've worked there, visited our place, all of them when I'm not even there, on my days off. Coincidence? I don't know. So I wasn't there. If I went up and tried to talk to, there was one exception. I had a vice president, and I did. I went to speak to him, and I told him something that was the most frequently complained about unethical activity of our company. Our affected parties endlessly complain about this. It is so immoral. Frankly, I believe it's illegal. I believe there could be easily class action suits against our company for this, easily. And I believe they should win. And I go and I tell that person, and he starts getting agitated, and he starts making up excuses and saying, and he starts using rhetoric and propaganda and manipulative language to frame this evil that the company's doing in terms of it's not so bad. And then he scampers away. And can you guess who I got to speak to next? The enforcers. This is how I ended up my last shift at this job. And I went through all of that so that I could come out and sit in a car that has no heater when it's minus 13 degrees outside for the foreseeable future, not just today. And while everyone else is getting a nice longer break for New Year's like they did for Christmas and Thanksgiving, all I'm getting is an extension of my misery as I sit in this car for nearly 48 hours instead of having it broken up every 12 hours or so by work. So I just get to sit here and freeze like this. I mean, the windows are, can you see it? Well, I'm not even going to bother, but the front windshield, it's fogging all up. I'll just screw the camera up if I touch it. Folks, under ordinary circumstances, someone in my situation has some degree of power. If you're not homeless and you're in a situation where it's illegal for me to apply for a job, so I can't go out and get a job to replace this evil one I'm working for, then I'm just stuck taking this abuse. And my only compensation for it is to make barely enough money, and really not. How much money I have had to spend on gas with this deep freeze, I can't go to the hotel next week at all. At all. I can't afford it. Again. So Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, those 2-day celebrations that everyone... Sorry, I had to fix the camera again. Look, folks, the point I'm getting at is this. Our institutions are typically set up in hierarchies. A hierarchy is not inherently bad. In fact, it's inherently good. Remember all the checks and balances we have in our hierarchy. That's what prevents the United States of America from becoming a tyranny. But only if everybody in that hierarchy does their job. Everybody. You can't have somebody just at my level who is trying desperately to do the most extraordinary possible job I can when nobody from my supervisor all the way to the CEO doesn't care. And the one person in the company who does care and who makes such an effort to do extraordinarily good job is the one person who takes this kind of a beating, living in a car. And in most hierarchies, the equivalent is true. Why aren't these CEOs constantly walking around all departments within their companies, spending most of their time there, talking to people and telling them, you are free to speak to me. You can say anything to me. No retaliation. You will not hear human resources. Nothing's going in your file. You tell me the truth. And I'll deal with it. I'll fix it. I'll turn this company into a smooth running machine. If that happened, I would have no problem with CEOs making $50 million a year. Even the head of the Red Cross, I wouldn't have a problem with it. Problem is, the Red Cross doesn't help anybody, does it? Except for token gestures. So why is she making almost $700,000 a year? Our country, if our country is going to remain free, then every citizen at every level is required to act responsibly. Not to be a lazy bum, not to be unethical, not to be immoral. not to pass the buck. If the buck stops with you, you take care of business. If everybody did that, the hierarchy would work wonderfully. I have no problems with hierarchies. I have no problem with somebody being above me, having authority over me, as long as it is legitimate authority. But all the checks and balances, for example, in our government have broken down completely. And that's why someone who isn't even the President of the United States, who claims to be the President of the United States, can just tyrannically declare, just dictate some mandate that opposes everything this country stands for, and I'm at risk of losing my job over it at the very bottom of this hierarchy. It's because nobody in between's doing anything about it. None of these legislators are prosecuting that guy, impeaching him, getting him out of office. He's incompetent. He didn't even get the job legitimately in the first place when you look at the election. But even if you believe he was elected properly, what he's doing, what he did with Afghanistan, leaving all those Americans over there, leaving all those weapons with the people who have sworn to destroy the great Satan. That's what a traitor does. That's treason, folks. There's nobody doing anything about this stuff. In all the companies, probably the company you're working for, nobody's doing their job either. And you know what? It starts at the top. It's the person at the top who makes all that money, who has to be the one who does those walkthroughs constantly and makes it clear to everybody, you are free to speak up. I'm not going to punish somebody who points out a problem with this company. I'm going to punish someone who refuses to take action to fix the problem in this company. That one difference, if that were implemented in our company, the one I work in, none of these affected parties would have their professional careers at risk, because of our utter, absolute incompetence and the fact that nobody in this company above me even cares whether those people live or die. They don't care. In the years I've been there, it is more than obvious. They don't care. If Joe Schmo loses their whole professional career and they end up living in a car and their family dies of starvation, my bosses up the chain do not care. They won't lose any sleep over it. They won't shed a single tear. They won't feel one little bing of conscience. Nothing. They don't care. Which is why I say the company I work for is ripe, if again you had competent attorneys out there, ripe for class action lawsuits, and it should happen. I hate to say it, I work for the company. I've done everything I can for all these years to try to fix these issues, but I don't have any power. Like I said in the last video, my expertise is being at the top of a hierarchy, not at the bottom. Because when I'm at the top, I make sure these things happen. I do go to those people. I take responsibility for the whole company, down to the janitor. Now, it doesn't mean I'm going to be able to know in every single instance at some plant in another state, did someone slip and fall on the floor? I mean, you got to be reasonable about these things. But if there's a trend toward, lax rules in the company that almost inevitably are going to cause somebody to slip and fall like that, that's a problem. That shouldn't be there. And you don't need OSHA for that. You need a responsible person at the top of your hierarchy. OSHA comes in and claims to take care of that stuff for the company, and that's why these CEOs say, I don't have to even worry about it. OSHA's got it covered. They're the regulatory agency. Let them do all the work. They'll tell us what to do. We'll send out a memo, and we've covered our ass if we do that, send out a memo. And if someone gets hurt or dies, well, that's their problem. I'm not going to lose any sleep over it. That's what these CEOs do. That Bezos there, when the Amazon warehouse got blown down by the tornado, he's sitting there partying with his space capsule. He wasn't there just devastated and shedding tears over the fact that the people who made him into a billionaire, the people at the bottom here, where it says, you see where it says, do the actual work, that would be them. Warehouse employees, for example. They get wiped out by a tornado, and he's out there partying with his little space friends. And you're going to tell me that's a good, competent CEO? Folks, I hope this helps you understand. Please listen to what I'm saying. Look at this chart and apply it to all the hierarchies you know of. Your local government, your state government, the federal government, your employer, social services, even churches, any hierarchy. I mean, if you go back to Greek philosophy, Plato, he pitched the idea that the best form of government was what he called the philosopher king. And I agree with him in a way. The problem is there is no such thing as a philosopher king. It's an ideal that will never be realized. The human species is too flawed. If you have a king, basically a dictator, but he's perfect, if he's a thinker, a philosopher, not just some money-grubbing, I gotta wear the best-looking clothes, drive the fastest car, not one of those idiots, but a human, just perfect as a human being in all its aspects. And in Christianity, you would have that with Jesus. The return of Jesus, when he comes back, will be the king. He's God and man at the same time, and he will be king of this world, the world that you live in. Well, that's okay, you see. The King of England or the Queen of England, I could care less. I'm not bowing down before them. But if you get someone who's perfect, like God, Jesus, and he's king, I'm doing what he says because he knows what's best. Now, humans aren't that good, but that's why you have checks and balances and all these hierarchies. But if nobody's taking responsibility for executing those checks and balances, the whole thing falls apart. And in the end, you end up with a situation where it doesn't really matter, in a way, whether you have this completely, utterly broken down hierarchy, or if you have a Saddam Hussein, or a Kim Jong-un running the show, some kind of just absolutely insane dictator. What difference does it make? The outcome is roughly the same. I'm here to tell you, we should cherish these hierarchies, and we should fix them. Because we don't want a dictator in office. When you get a dictator, there's no easy way to fix that. Because to fix it, you have to institute all these hierarchies. It's better to let the hierarchies remain and to fix the hierarchies. But if you get a prosecutor at the Attorney General's office, what level was that here? That was the level of the equivalent of human resources, the enforcer in a corporation. If you get an Attorney General who's sitting there trying to put all of our police officers in prison, you go after that Attorney General. You get them out of office. You make their prosecutors lose their jobs. Because they're destroying the people who are putting their lives on the line to protect and serve us. Every police officer out there is afraid to do their job because if they make a mistake, which human beings do, they might go to prison. Keith Ellison should be the one who's in the unemployment line. These prosecutors who sent these police officers to prison, they should not have a job. OSHA. If OSHA's going to sit there and say, well, we're the regulators, we're the enforcers, we're not going to hold corporate CEOs accountable with all that money they make, even though they have all this so-called responsibility, they're not actually going to be responsible for anything because we're going to come along and make their place safe. And if something goes wrong, it's not his fault. It's some lower level thug who's just going to get, all these, remember the failure? Oh, it's the people at the very low end who get scapegoated, terminated, written up, criminally prosecuted. OSHA makes that happen. OSHA should not exist. Because you have OSHA, you don't have companies doing the job anymore. Checks and balances. If you have a company that has unsafe work environment, people can file lawsuits, they can form unions, they can do things to get it fixed. But if you rely on government to do it, everything's dissociated. OSHA has its own interests in mind. They're not standing up and saying what Biden put in here with a vaccine mandate is immoral, unconstitutional, and I, as a human being who values the fact that life isn't worth living unless you're free, I take offense to it, and I'm not going to enforce this stupid, illegal rule. If OSHA's not going to do that, they are the problem every bit as much as Biden was. But they're too lazy, they're too scared, they will not stand up, even like a homeless person will, and put their neck on the line when I go to our supervisor, or when I went to that vice president who came in there, or when I was at the medical company, when I would go there to their higher-ups and say what everybody at my level was saying, But they weren't allowed to go up and say it to the right people because human resources will come in and slit their throat. And hey, what happened when I was at the medical company? I got my throat slit by human resources. Fired without any advance notice the week of Thanksgiving. I long for the day when I'm dead and that writer can tell you the name of that company, folks. And so many other names. So many names in this company I work for right now. I'm freezing to death. This video's gone on a long time. I hope you got something out of it. If there was ever a video I give you that I hope you will spend a lot of time thinking about to apply it to your life, not even to my situation. This hierarchy chart is one way to look at organizations. It's not a perfect chart. I had to throw it together. Again, all my research is in storage. I had to just throw this together off the top of my head, but I hope it'll help you understand why you're seeing the problems that you're seeing in your companies, in your churches, in your organizations, nonprofits, government, everything. And if you look really closely at it, you'll even start to understand why there's 4 million homeless people in the United States of America. And I hope you'll think about that. I can't take the cold anymore. I can't feel my feet. Thank you for watching. Happy New Year.
Once again at 2 a.m. in the Twin Cities, it was -2 degrees. The wind chill was -18 under mostly cloudy skies. Now the forecast for the Twin Cities metropolitan area. Tonight, mostly cloudy. Lows around 13 below. North winds 10 to 15 miles an hour. Wind chills around 30 below. New Year's Day, partly cloudy. Highs around 4 below. North winds 10 to 15 miles an hour. Wind chills around 32 below. Saturday night, partly cloudy in the evening, then clearing. Lows around 19 below. Northwest winds 5 to 10 miles an hour. Wind chills around 36 below. Sunday, sunny. Highs around 3. Southwest winds 5 to 10 miles an hour. Wind chills around 36 below in the morning. Sunday night, not as cold. Clear. Lows around 3 below. Temperatures rising to around 5 above overnight. South winds 5 to 10 miles